Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010, the summer session 2019. In this video, we'll be going over the Samkhya philosophy and the Yoga philosophy. So we are going over the exam questions for exam 1, and in this video, we'll be going over question from part B, question number 1. What are the three gunas as described in the verses on the analysis of nature by Ishvarakrishna and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali? So in the previous videos we went over the philosophy of the Upanishads, the Vedanta philosophy of the Upanishads, which believes in eternal individual souls, Atman, the flip side of which is Brahman, the ocean of potential being. And we contrasted that to the Buddhist philosophy of Anatman, no Atman, no individual souls. There is a spiritual energy, there is omnipresent consciousness, but it's not individual consciousness. It's not consciousness of a personal self. And we also went over the classical Indian materialist philosophy, which is very similar to modern neo-Darwinism, which says that consciousness comes from a combination of material ingredients and that there is no afterlife, and that knowledge comes from your sense organs. If you can see it or smell it or touch it or taste it or hear it, it's real. Otherwise, it's a figment of your imagination. There's no soul, and you can't think out the way the world works and discover that there is a soul, because that materialist philosophy does not believe in inference, knowledge through inference, through the idea of applying the idea of cause and effect from one scenario to other scenarios in the future that are similar. And they say you can't be sure. You can't be absolutely certain that just because you saw a sequence of events occur in one way in the past, that it will always occur that way in similar situations in the future. There's no logical ground to base that on other than you're habituated to seeing it, so you assume it must always be that way. But that, for that philosophy, does not qualify. So those were the three philosophies we've gone over so far. Now in this video, it is the these are only two short readings, and we're going to just focus on the gunas, which are the three modes of material nature. And so this is the Samkhya philosophy and Yoga philosophy. So it's all part of Hinduism. So if you look on page 214 of our book, so here's our book, Introduction to World Philosophy, a multicultural reader. There's some important information about just the different schools within Hinduism. So on page 214, the introductory remarks say, the term Hindu gained prominence in India only after invasions from the West, first by Muslims and then by European traders and colonialists. Several ancient and classical philosophies are mainstays for the umbrella religion that we call Hinduism today. They include Vedanta, but also Samkhya, Yoga, and Mimamsa, exegesis. So I'm not asking any questions specifically about Shankara's school of Vedanta philosophy. We went over the theistic Vedanta philosophy of the Upanishads. Upanishad means end of the Vedas. So the Vedas were the original scriptures of the Vedic civilization, which was later called Hindu civilization by invading conquerors, beginning with the Muslims. So the Upanishads were then appended to the Vedas. It means the end of the Vedas. And then you've got other schools under this umbrella term of Hinduism. And today, in this video, we'll be going over the Samkhya philosophy and Yoga philosophy. So on page 215, the introduction says, Samkhya analysis, it means analysis, proposes careful understanding of nature, which is prakriti, including not only her organizing principles, but also her subtle presentations of herself as thoughts and emotions. So Samkhya philosophy says you are an eternal soul. They do believe in the Purusha, the Atman. You are an individual soul, and the way to be released is by being able to discriminate in your mind between the soul, or the Purusha, and nature, Prakriti, which includes not only physical matter, but also your thoughts. So mind and matter, for the Samkhya philosophy, are both material. It's the same in the Upanishads. Mind is literally one of the material elements that encompasses the horizon: earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then in some of the Upanishads, there's extra etheric shells. Mind, intelligence, and false ego. That's all in the material world. In the previous videos, when I discussed the ether, that outermost boundary of the material universe, is also where the Upanishads say the supreme Atman is interwoven at that outermost boundary between the encompassing ocean of Brahman and the material universe. That's the ether. But in other Upanishads, ether has other shells outside of it, so the basic rule is whatever the outermost shell of the universe is, that is the connecting point between the material universe and the spiritual world. That's so if you choose to answer for exam 1, part B, number 2, about what is the ether in the Upanishads, that's the basic point. The outermost sphere is where the supreme Atman exists, and from where the supreme Atman creates this dreamlike material world. So Samkhya philosophy is focusing more on just learn how to discriminate between your actual thinking conscious self and the two types of nature, material and mental. And if you can do that, you'll be alleviated from the miseries of identifying yourself with the material body. And that's where the exam question about the 3 gunas, the 3 modes of material nature, comes in. So to understand that, we have to understand the overall philosophy. So the yoga school, on page 250 in the introductory remarks, I'll just read a little bit here. Yoga as a school of philosophy has much in common with Samkhya. Both view nature as real, but as alien to the true individuals we are. Both describe true individuals similarly, but Samkhya lays out principles of nature in a comprehensive worldview. Yoga is thoroughly practical. In the philosophy of the Yoga Sutra, a handbook on yogic practices, postures, breath control, meditation, exercises, and so on, by practicing yoga, self-discipline, we can discover a higher self. So the Yoga Sutras say in order to realize the truths revealed by the Samkhya philosophy, you have to practice certain forms of meditation, which include body postures, breathing techniques, and also meditational techniques. But in the Yoga Sutras, we'll also find these references to the gunas, which is what I'll focus on, since that is a really key part of the philosophy, but it's also the exam question, part B, number 1 for exam 1. So on page 218, Ishvarakrishna, from Verses on the Analysis of Nature, Samkhya Karika. So he starts out by saying, because of the torment of the threefold suffering, there arises the desire to know the means of counteracting it. A little later he says, the revealed or scriptural means of removing the torment are like the perceptible eye, ultimately ineffective, for they are connected with impurity, destruction, and excess. So he's saying the Vedic texts aren't always reliable. He's just saying no. For they are connected with impurity, destruction, and excess. A superior method, different from both, is the discriminative knowledge. That's what Samkhya is, learning to discriminate. The discriminative knowledge of the manifest, the unmanifest, and the knowing one, or knower, i.e. Purusha. So manifest, unmanifest, Purusha. The unmanifest, that word in the Upanishads sometimes refers to Brahman, the spiritual flip side of Atman. But in this text, the unmanifest is referring to the mental side of nature, the mental, psychological side of Prakriti, whereas the manifest is the physical side. They're both material, but one's subtler, the unmanifest mental. So to deliver yourself from the sufferings of reincarnation, you need to learn to discriminate in your mind between who am I as a self, which is the overall question that this part 2 of the book is addressing. What is myself and what is it not? So this text is saying you're not matter, you're not mind, you're the consciousness that experiences those things. All right, so on page 218, the left-hand column, paragraph 4, so the paragraphs are numbered. The attainment of reliable knowledge is based on determining the means of correct knowledge. The accepted means of correct knowledge are 3. So here's the 3. Perception, that's sense perception, inference, and reliable authority. The Yoga Sutras agree with that. So perception is sense perception. You can see it and smell it, hear it, touch it, taste it. That's one way to learn about the difference between the self and nature. The other way is inference. So we saw the Charvaka school, the materialist Indian school of philosophy, say that is not a reliable source of knowledge. Inference, meaning I saw, for example, I drop a pen, I let it go, and it falls. That's just the way it always is, so I can assume that will hold true no matter where I go in the universe forever. That's inference. I can infer that it happened in this case, and it's a universal general law. That is rejected by the materialist schools because they say, I can't perceive this universal law that must hold true in the future. I can't see the future. How do I know for sure it's going to work in the future? All I know is what I can see. That is rejected by the Samkhya philosophy. They say, no, inference is reliable. And we're going to see the same debate go on between David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Also, for our discussion 1, the question is, which is more plausible to you, the Hindu Platonic idea of an eternal individual soul that reincarnates, or the Buddhist Humean view that there is no individual self? So Hume was an empiricist as well. But for now, getting back to the 3 gunas, so through sense perceptions, through inference, learning the laws of physical nature and psychological nature, and from reliable authorities. However you determine a reliable authority, you can gain knowledge through these 3 sources. So if you now look on the right-hand column on page 218 at the very bottom, paragraph 11, both the manifest and unmanifest are characterized by the 3 gunas. And then in parentheses it says constituents or strands. So then it goes on to say they're characterized by other things: undiscriminated, objective, general, non-conscious. So the manifest and unmanifest sides, material and psychological sides of nature, are not conscious. They seem to be conscious because they're united with the conscious being. But they're also characterized by the 3 gunas. Psychology is characterized by these 3 strands, and so is the material objects. So continuing the next paragraph 12 on page 219, the gunas, whose natures are pleasure, pain, and indifference, serve to manifest, activate, and limit. They successively dominate, support, activate, and interact with one another. Sattva is buoyant and shining, rajas is stimulating and moving, tamas is heavy and enveloping. They function for the sake of the Purusha like a lamp. So sattva guna, raja guna, tama guna. Those are the 3 gunas, the 3 strands of material nature. They're the overarching ordering principles of everything material, both physical and psychological. So again, the mind, which we would normally associate with the self in Samkhya philosophy, and in Hindu philosophy generally, they're saying, no, it's still material. It is not consciousness. The way your ideas come up, the images that you see in your mind, those are material. They're very subtle material, but they're made of a subtle form of matter. And all forms of matter, subtle and gross, or this translation, manifest and unmanifest, are made of and controlled by 3 strands or ropes, these all-pervading strings of material nature called gunas. It means strands, like strings or ropes. And there's Sattva, rajas, and tamas sometimes is translated as the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. If you look on page 212, these gunas are mentioned, two of them in one of the Upanishads, the Maitri Upanishad. Page 212, the right-hand column up at the top, here's how they describe the tamaguna and rajaguna. And it has been said elsewhere: bewilderment, fear, grief, sleep, sloth, carelessness, decay, sorrow, hunger, thirst, wrath, infidelity, ignorance, envy, cruelty, folly, shamelessness, meanness, pride, changeability. These are the results of the quality of darkness, tamas: inward thirst, fondness, passion, covetousness, unkindness, love, hatred, deceit, jealousy, and there's more, prodigality. These are the results of the quality of passion, rajas. By these he is filled, by these he is overcome, and therefore this elemental self assumes manifold forms. Yes, manifold forms. So, in the Upanishads as well, if you're overcome by the three modes of material nature, then you have to take one material body after another. So, continuing here on page 219, from Ishvarakrishna's verses on the analysis of nature, the left-hand column, page 219, paragraph 18, the plurality, actually paragraph 14, lack of discrimination, etc., is established because of the manifest having the three gunas and because of the absence of the gunas in the opposite of that, i.e. the purusha. The unmanifest is likewise established because of the guna nature and the cause of the effect. All right. The next paragraph. The plurality of purushas is established, A, because of the diversity of births, deaths, and faculties. B, because of their actions or functions that take place at different times. C, and because of differences in the proportions of the three gunas in different entities. And therefore, because the purusha is the opposite of the unmanifest, it is established that purusha is a witness, possessed of isolation or freedom, indifference, and a spectator and inactive. All right, so it's the activity of the three gunas that create all of the happenings of the material world. And the purusha, which is the word they're using instead of atman here in this text, only the purusha has consciousness. The three modes of material nature, though they appear to be conscious because they're mixed with the purusha. So in paragraph 20 on page 219, because of the proximity or association of the two, prakriti and purusha, the unconscious one appears as if characterized by consciousness. Similarly, the indifferent one appears as if characterized by activity because of the activities of the three gunas. So it's the three gunas that are acting in the material world, not the soul, although it seems as if the souls are. So the modes of passion and ignorance, rajas and tamas, they force the soul to reincarnate because of desires and sinful activities. But the mode of goodness is the transition point. If you can act primarily in the mode of sattva guna, goodness, then you can make the transition to exit the cycle of reincarnation. The last paragraph on page 219, the buddhi, the will or the intellect, the mind, is characterized by ascertainment or determination. Virtue, knowledge, non-attachment, and possession of power are its sattvika form. Its tamasa form is the opposite of these four. Okay, so the three modes of material nature, they also determine the caste system. Everyone has all three modes, but what proportion are they in? That determines your caste. Brahmin, Kshatriya, the warrior politician caste, Vaishya, the merchant, landed gentry caste, and Shudra, the laborer caste. Beneath that is the outcasts, the Chandalas. So the Brahmins are predominantly in the mode of goodness, sattva guna. The Kshatriyas are the warrior caste, predominantly in the mode of passion, rajas, mixed with sattva. Rajas means king. It also means passion. The merchant class, primarily in the mixed modes of passion and ignorance. And then the laborer class, primarily, according to this Hindu philosophy, in the mode of tamas, ignorance. If allowed to, people motivated primarily by the mode of ignorance would rather sleep, not work, get intoxicated. So that's what they're saying. That kind of mentality needs to be bossed around by people in the mode of passion And those people supposedly should be controlled by the people in the mode of goodness to keep them under control. So that's the caste system. These three modes of nature determine the psychology of individuals. It determines the structure of their physical bodies. It determines the structure of all the material world. Everything is made out of a combination of these three gunas. So now moving to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So this is the practical side of Samkhya philosophy. Here's the way it is. You need to discriminate the Purusha, the soul, from the subtle and gross material bodies, mind and matter. How do you do that? Yoga Sutras give examples of how to properly sit, breathing exercises, but this is a philosophy class, so this book focuses primarily on the philosophical advice in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Page 219, verse 1.2, Yoga is the stilling of fluctuations of thought and emotion. Then the seer, the conscious being, Purusha, rests in its true form. On the right-hand column, 1.7, the knowledge sources are perception, inference, and testimony, including scriptural tradition. So we saw that in Samkhya philosophy as well. So I'm going to just focus on the gunas for now. So on page 220, verse 1.16, superior to that, which is achieving disinterestedness, not being interested in sense desires. So superior to that is the absolute disinterestedness of lack of desire for manifest or unmanifest phenomena. And then in parentheses, guna, qualities, because of perception of the Purusha. So being completely free from the three modes of nature is the goal of yoga. To calm the mind so much that the conscious being can discriminate itself from the gross and subtle manifestations of the three modes of nature. And then you can achieve what's called samadhi. Verse 1.17, samadhi, mystic trance or mystic accomplishment, has two forms, one of which is supported by wisdom in accordance with reasoning, discrimination, bliss, and sense of identity, I amness. The other, in which only mental dispositions remain, is preceded by effort to hold steady ideas intent on contentment. So we're not going to focus on that, but you're trying to achieve samadhi, completely stilling the mind so that you can free the soul from material nature. Over on the right-hand column, down near the bottom, section 2.5, to be spiritually ignorant is to mistake the non-eternal, impure, painful, and non-self for the eternal, pure, delightful, and true self. And then he talks about symptoms of not knowing your true self is fear of death, for example. You wouldn't fear death if you didn't identify yourself with the mortal body. The soul doesn't age, it doesn't die, it's eternal. So going over to the page 221, the left-hand column, section 2.18, right in the middle. What is to be seen, i.e. nature, is characterized by the three qualities or strands of intelligence, activity, and stability or inertia, sattva, rajas, and tamas. It includes the gross elements and the sense organs and has its raison d'etre, enjoyment for or liberation of the conscious being. So again, everything is made of these three strands of material nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And we're trying to get primarily in the mode of goodness is the advice that is given. So on the right-hand column on page 221, verse 230, the restraints, yama, are non-harmfulness, non-injury, ahimsa, which is peacefulness, truthfulness, non-stealing, sexual restraint, and non-possessiveness. Those constitute the great vow. If you want to calm your mind, to liberate your soul, you have to control your sense desires. Tell the truth. And these are all symptoms of people who are motivated primarily by the mode of goodness, the sattva guna. So if you look, and even finally, you have to disentangle yourself finally even from the mode of goodness. So that page 222, section 3.49, up at the top on the left, the yogin, whose awareness is restricted to perception of the difference between the strand of nature called intelligence, sattva, and the conscious being, achieves mastery over all states of inner being and knowledge of it all as well. So first you try to get yourself primarily in the mode of goodness, and then from there disentangle yourself even from that last material attachment. And then if you can do that, you will achieve samadhi. In the middle of the left-hand column, verse 3.54, the cognition born of discrimination carries to the further shore with everything as its object in every fashion and non-sequentially. So in the context of the Upanishads, that's the same thing as that is called the ether in the Upanishads, the further shore, the outermost horizon of the cosmos, in which everything is contained non-sequentially, meaning the past, the present, and the future are simultaneously present at each point of that encompassing sphere. And you can deliver your soul out to that point of all knowledge through the process of yoga. That's what they're saying. And when you're there, then the next verse, 3.55, when the intelligence strand, i.e. sattva, and the conscious being are equal in purity, aloneness, kaivalya, ensues. So aloneness, being separate from all matter, ensues, out at this furthest shore of the universe. Going lower on the left-hand column, on page 222, 4.13, particulars are manifest or subtle. They are of the nature of combinations of the strands of the three gunas. The truth or particularity of a thing is due to a unique transformation of nature, a unique combination of gunas. So then over on page 223, on the left-hand column, section 4.32, thence the completion of processes of transformation on the part of the strands, the gunas, their purpose fulfilled. If you achieve self-awareness, the three gunas' purpose is fulfilled. Process, which is relative to the units of time, is apprehensible at the end of a transformation. Aloneness, kaivala, the highest good. So that's uniting with the furthest shore where the past, present, and future coexist of the whole universe. That's called being alone. When you're out there, ironically, you're with everything simultaneously, so you're alone, separate from the illusion of the material world. It's the highest good. So aloneness entails the reversal of the course of the strands or qualities of nature, gunas, now empty of meaning and value for the conscious being, or it may be understood as the power of consciousness returned and established in its own true self. The true self is this outermost ether in which is interwoven all of space and time. Space and time are projections of the self. We're not, according to this philosophy, byproducts of the little bits of matter floating in space, as the materialist philosophy says. We are the source of all space and time, and it's specifically out at this outermost boundary of the universe. And that's where all of these three modes of material nature are interwoven with each other. And then they radiate inward to create all of the material universe. Both the psychological and the physical laws of the universe can be reduced to the laws of these three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance, sattva guna, rajaguna, and tama guna. So the question is, for exam 1, part B, question number 1, what are the three gunas as described in the verses on the analysis of nature by Ishvarakrishna and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali? I think we've gone over it sufficiently, and that will be it. In the next video, I will be going over the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle.